I'm Rob Thomas, editor-in-chief of Club and Resort Business, and welcome to another episode of the Club and Resort Talks podcast. We have a special guest, Colin Burns, longtime GM of Wingfoot, but he talks about everything that's going on in the industry from what we can expect in the future to how it's changed over time. So stick around for Colin. Terrific conversation. But before I start that, let me tell you that today's podcast is sponsored by Club Essential. Club Essential leads the private club industry with its Essential Suite, the award-winning, fully integrated platform that transforms club management, with offerings including accounting, CRM, mobile app, POS, reservations and spa management, single source payment processing, and more. The Essential Suite connects every aspect of the club operations. Learn more at clubessential.com. Thank you very much, Club Essentials, for sponsoring today's podcast. Before we get to Colin Burns, I want to tell you that there's a little bit of news going around, so let's get to it, starting in Wisconsin. This Wisconsin course is moving forward with a clubhouse expansion and a simulator addition. The proposed project at Washington County Golf Course in West Bend, Wisconsin, includes a remodel of the existing clubhouse along with a new addition that will feature indoor golf simulators. With the concept now approved, the plan moves into the final design phase. Big news. Obviously, Wisconsin has a condensed golf season, just like we do here in Ohio. We can't play golf year round like you lucky folks down in Arizona and Florida, but they get along. They do okay. The simulator is going to add to that, obviously. So good on them. Club fittings, they can do winter simulator leagues, lessons, so on and so forth. Even the summertime when it's raining outside, go inside, hit some golf balls. Down in the Carolinas, the Kakalakis, as they say, True Blue has acquired a golf academy. The Pawleys Island Club acquired Steve Dresser Golf Academy, a renowned instructional facility that has been a staple of the course for decades. Bob Saganti, I hope I probably butchered his name, quoted as saying it's business as usual when it comes to day-to-day operations. What we focus now is leveraging True Blue's brand and marketing reach to bring greater visibility to the academy and its offerings. It's been there, it's been popular. Now it's all under one umbrella. So the branding and everything can jibe. All the instructors are staying, so it's a seamless transition. No hiccups in service. So good on True Blue Caledonia, or Caledonia True Blue, I think they go by, but very, very good. Last but not least, the NCAA, National Club Association, has announced its board of directors and executive committee. Michael McCarthy of Addison Reserve Country Club will lead as chair. Joe Traeger, the president and CEO, says NCAA is privileged to have such knowledge, innovation, and dedication on its board of directors. Very, very good. A number of people you're going to recognize. Robert Ceracchi has been one of them that's being involved. That's involved with NCAA or NCAA. Got basketball in my mind, but very good, very important role they play in the club association, the club industry. So very good. Check out all the names. Make sure you send a little congratulatory email to your friends in the industry. All that taken care of. From sponsor to news. Let's get right to Colin Burns. Hello, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Rob Thomas, and I'm joined by Colin Burns. Colin, welcome to the show.
Rob, thanks for having me. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Hey, Colin, you are, without embarrassing you, you're kind of an icon in the industry. You've been through the wars. You obviously have a heck of a resume. Give us a little bit of an elevator. I don't want to say an elevator pitch, but talk about an overview of your career, if you could.
Well, it's interesting. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it now that I'm sort of retired, which is, I think, a misstatement because I've actually been really busy, but I'm technically in retirement mode. It's interesting the way it all worked out. I've reflected on it a bit. And, I had never, I did not intentionally choose becoming a club manager. I was actually raised in the restaurant business. My father and the family had a very successful restaurant in Clifton, New Jersey, right down the street from Montclair State College, where I always like to say we had a very famous alum named Bruce Willis, who was a waiter there. Poor Bruce is not doing well at this point, and I feel terribly because I got to know him very well over the years. And so I was raised in the hospitality business, four brothers, and it's funny. I After college, I decided to backpack through Europe for a couple of years, and did that. Did a little bit of time, came back, and I ended up in Atlantic City of all places. It had just come online in 1987. Actually, it was 1985, and Merv Griffin, Resorts International, all that stuff, and everything was brand new and shiny and sparkly. And I went down there, and I was working. Anyway, very long story short, I was working with somebody who suggested. Matter of fact, he was one of the stars of Goodfellas, a guy named Tony Darrow. I always have to give him credit. Tony said to me, "Have you thought about working in a club?" And I said, "No, we were members at North Jersey, Glen Ridge, Hackensack, and so I knew the club industry, but never from sort of the inside. I knew it as a consumer." And sure enough, I was lucky enough to get an interview at a place called Plandome Country Club out in Manhasset, a great little, we used to call it a Knights of Columbus with a golf course. It was this great Irish Catholic sort of bastion of just, golf and drinking, sort of like a pub with a golf course. And then 4 years later, I was invited to interview at Wingfoot. And I went off. If it were the Kentucky Derby, I would have gone off at probably 10,000 to 1 odds when I interviewed there. I have no idea even why they gave me the interview. I guess I established a pretty good reputation. And 31 years later, that was it. So 2 U.S. Opens, PGA Championship, U.S. Amateur, four-bowl championship, $100 million in capital improvements, and a lot of stuff in between that 31 years.
I'll tell if people want to go recap it, you were our May 2024 cover boy. So the whole article was right there. So I'm familiar with your background, obviously, having written the article, but thank you for giving us a bit of an overview. And Wingfoot is a heck of a place to hang your hat for 31 years. So you're a member, then you've dealt with members for, I mean, 40 years of your career practically. How's the member expectations evolved over time,
Well,
and what must clubs do today to stay ahead of these changes?
It's really interesting that you mentioned that because the timing is perfect. I spent a couple of days in New York City as part of the National Club Association, the conference, which was hosted at the New York AC. And I was with a colleague who was from out of town. I'm doing some work with them at the St. Louis Racquet Club. And, he wanted to see what other clubs in, others, the racket and city social clubs are doing. And I had the fortune of visiting some of the premier clubs, the Lynx Club, Yale University, racket and tennis. And I'm absolutely astonished at what's going on at those clubs. They are in such pristine, perfect condition. And I think because, I'm typically now visiting clubs as a result of being a part of the Apogee group. Apogee is the club in Hope Sound. The third golf course is just being completed. We've got a great list of members. We're ahead of schedule on all construction. So what I do almost on a day-to-day basis is visit country clubs and golf clubs as a way of promoting as an ambassador Apogee. So I went to these city clubs, and to your question about expectations, I don't think they've ever been higher. I think the membership demographic is getting younger and younger. The wealth is getting obviously, sort of higher and higher, and the expectation is commensurate with that. One of the things that really I think impressed me at all the clubs, sort of the orderly cleanliness, the archival work. I mean, everything is just done. And I remember some of these clubs, not that many years ago that were not in the condition that they are now. And I can say the same thing about country clubs and golf clubs that I visit. I mean, I've been to some clubs that were considered years ago sort of second or third tier clubs that are just spectacular now, and it's just, and that's part of by obviously the golf boom and the influx of people into what were traditionally second tier clubs. So expectations continue to rise. The member experience, more and more emphasis is being put on that every day, and that's a door to door. What is it like from the moment you arrive at the gate to the minute you leave? And so I think it's a great time for both the country club, golf clubs, and the social city racket clubs.
So you mentioned the golf boom. Obviously, the COVID was terrible for the world, but really benefited the club industry. Wait lists were never as long as they were over the last handful of years. Uh, that's kind of going away now. Things are returning to normal somewhat, not necessarily back to the struggling times, but back to a flatter land. What are some of the most pressing challenges that you think clubs are facing right now?
Well, I think this is to get into the weeds a little bit, but I think one of the challenges clubs are going to see is alcohol consumption, which will have a direct effect on the bottom line. I think you see it. I was able to present at a Troon senior management meeting. They asked me to come in and speak. And part of their presentation, which I was privy to, was the fact that across the board, both within Troon Properties and within the industry at large, alcohol consumption is down. And those of us who have worked in clubs that have active, robust social programs, I think that's going to be a real bottom line challenge. I think the other challenge, Rob, that we continue to see, and I've spoken about this on various occasions, is sort of member behavior, and to use that famous sort of club management word, comportment. And I think we continue to deal with issues with members sort of behaving like members, and I think that's part of this influx had a negative impact, if you will, because a lot of clubs took in members that had not been sort of raised in the club environment, and as a result, there's been this push and pull with sort of keeping these orderly, not overly sort of sort of dictatorial, and yet at the same time trying to maintain some type of some civility and some decorum at clubs. So I think that's another challenge. So I think you have bottom line challenges coming up now. And who knows what? I was just reading a detailed article in the journal about, a shipping container that just came from China, that there's $457 million worth of tariffs on that one ship. And if you go into the details, it's aluminum cans, it's tractors, it's things that we in the club industry consume. So, who knows how that's going to impact us. So I think there's going to be bottom line pressure. Expectations are still going to be there, right? So people are going to be expecting that high member experience, and yet there's going to be pressure on the downward pressure on the bottom line.
So I don't pretend to be a political aficionado at all,
Yeah,
but I'm fingers are crossed that these tariffs, that cooler heads will prevail, and they're not going to just wreak havoc on the industry and the world as a whole. Again, without getting into the left versus right and the blue
yeah.
versus red, let's just keep our fingers crossed. Technology, something that China is very well known for, is playing a larger role in the club operations these days, from booking tea times to making reservations to just everything going on. What innovations have been the most impactful in your time, and where do you see the greatest opportunity for growth in the technology?
Well, what's funny when you say it in sort of in my perspective. I mean, I came to clubs where they were still doing handwritten chits, and they were being pigeonholed alphabetically, and then they had to be sorted. So a member received their statement 2 months after the fact, and they got their chits sometimes 6 months after the fact, and it was a bit chaotic. I think that to jump ahead, I mean, I think Wingfoot Golf Club had one of the first websites, certainly of a top 10 club. And I remember presenting to the board and saying, we need a website. And at the time, there was 15 of them, and 15 of these guys looked at me like, what is a website? What does this even mean? And if you think about that moment, and I said, well, simply to communicate. I've always enjoyed technology. So if you think about that moment to where we are now, where we're all using AI, where when at Apogee, we did a deep dive into what technology we would bring in, whether it was Jonas, North Star, Cobalt, and it's fascinating how all of that has evolved, right? From these non-integrated systems where you had a Micron point of sale system, and then you had Jonas in the back office, and we were taking out disks and putting them into different desktops, and to now these fully integrated systems. I mean, it's come such a long way. Companies like Whoosh and Pacesetter in particular, who I'm just crazy about their app. I love what they do and how they do it. But it's funny, one of the things that I found, this is so sort of maybe microscopic, but I love at the at the CMA conference in Tampa, there was sort of a tap system that had beer and wine and water and sparkling water, and you walked up with your app and you logged in and you could draw whatever you wanted, and it recorded all of it, put it automatically on your account. And I thought, boy, what a difference that is from when times when we had the honor box, and guys would sometimes sign, sometimes not sign. And it's little things like that. I love innovations like that, and that one really blew me away. I loved it. And I think in terms of think of what AI can do for us, just in terms of member communication, in terms of data analytics. I mean, I think there's a lot out there. But I'm going to say, Rob, that nothing will ever replace, this belly to belly world that we live in, the warm welcome, the handshake at the door. And I think that's where club managers always need to focus. Technology is great and wonderful, and it'll create efficiencies and it'll help us understand trends. But I'm an old-fashioned hospitality guy, and I think nothing ever replaces that.
Well, I'll tell you what, as a former member of Mayfield Sandridge, I've filled out my share of chits, especially at the youth swim meets. And had I gone back 2 months later, I was like, whoa, okay,
Exactly
that was
right.
a heck of a swim meet. So,
That's funny.
so from pickleball to co-working spaces, amenities are diversifying
Beautiful.
today. How can club leaders determine, like, what's a passing fad and what's here to stay?
It's I just had this discussion with somebody about padel. I guess some people call it paddle padel. I first discovered it in Barcelona maybe 4 years ago, when I was there with my wife, and we were outside. It was 1 o'clock in the morning, and the Barcelona Athletic Club. I think they had 24 courts. All of them were still in use at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. I came back to the ownership group at Apogee and said, we have to install padel. And again, I sort of got that same look I got when I mentioned a website at Wingfoot. Like, what is that? And I said, well, just trust me. So we are installing Padel. And I'll answer your question, but I just want to give some context. I mean, Philadelphia Cricket Club, they installed, I guess, maybe 6 Padel courts, packed nonstop. Now, how did they determine, whether or not that was, to your question, whether it was a passing fancy or whether it was a trend? I think they're, Jim Smith Jr. down in Philly Cricket Club, and his colleagues, I think, did a sufficient amount of homework to know that it was a pent up demand. The members wanted more racket sports. They had the space for it. And I think, Rob, that's where I think, in a sense, back to your question about technology. This is where I think we can use technology. We can survey members, not the way we used to survey them with, scale of 1 to 5, and but really ask questions and understand the demographics on a forward-looking basis. And as somebody at the NCAA conference said, we have to be managing for our grandchildren, not our grandparents. And I think when we look at our grandchildren, in a sense, that next generation, and that's always a tough pill to swallow, right? When you sort of when you have to say to the members who are now in their 80s, mid 80s, things are going to change and you may not like it, but we have to continue evolving. So I think that's where data analytics come in, where you do a deep dive into the membership. And look, it's very easy to get caught up in trends, right? But I think thoughtful clubs, it's funny at Wingfoot, we always said we never wanted to be first. We always watched, I remember when we were transitioning from metal to plastic spikes, and we never wanted to be, we didn't want to be first, we didn't want to be last. So we would sort of stand on the sidelines, watch things happen a little bit. But it's to your question, I think, which sort of splits open that vein of what do we need to do in terms of member services to keep the membership happy and robust and active. And that's a challenge, particularly when you think about space requirements. Do we add bocce? Do we add this? Do we add that? And I think it really requires a very thoughtful approach, and not an approach where the board just makes a decision, but where they really go out into the membership, socialize ideas, do a real data collection, to figure out what the needs of the membership are.
So engaging the next generation while still keeping the current members happy is, I suppose, a huge challenge.
It's a huge challenge. I remember when we brought in, at Wingfoot, we brought in our first non-club chef, and a young guy who actually has gone on to great success. He was a New York Times reviewed, Nick Marchenko. he could cook. He was a colleague of Tom Colicchio, New York City fame. And I said, boy, this is really going to be, because we're going away from the real standard club culinary, and you remember them, that's sort of the meatloaf and sort of I mean, the real standards. And I have to tell you, I held my breath for a while, but it was the best thing we ever did because it catapulted our culinary program to the next level where we became everyone's favorite restaurant. Now, I think what we did was we made sure that we communicated, which I'm very big on. Why are we doing what we're doing, right? Not just doing, but explaining, particularly to the older members, what we're doing. And it was funny. I tell the story all the time. One of our most beloved senior members, who's since passed away, Brad Steinthal, whose father was on the board back in the 30s and 40s. He was our biggest advocate when we switched over the food program. And I said, boy, we've really hit a home run because we've connected not just with the younger membership, but with the older membership. We did that by being very thoughtful, very mindful, and really communicating with them, not making them feel isolated, but having them feel a part of this transition. And so it is a tough needle to thread, but it can be done.
This feels like a good time to plug our Chef to Chef conference. We're heading back to the Broadmoor. So if you want your chef at the cutting edge of technology and what's going on, Chef to Chef conference, look it up, right?
Boy, I've always heard great things about it. I've never attended, but I know chefs who have been there, and I've heard nothing but great things about it.
All right, Joanna DeShellis, Isabel Gustafson do a fantastic job on the chef side, and I've been to a number of them, and I can, from a non-chef perspective, it is absolutely fantastic, and the chefs generally rave about the programming and also the food that we get to enjoy while we're on
Yeah.
site. I think the Broadmoor is the next one we're going to, so to mark the calendar, right?
When is
Uh,
it?
so like topics like wellness, sustainability, I'm sure Apogee is all about that. Wellness, sustainability, social responsibility. That's influencing the club strategy and offerings today, and how so?
Well, it's all of these things sort of continue to resonate in my mind because it's some things that are new now are actually not that new, right? I remember when we were trying to transition away from plastic and the pushback dooring. So we brought in these little bamboo cups instead of the plastic at the turn, and we got pushback. And so it was this push and pull. But I think the good news is that we continue to move forward in a more responsible way as stewards of the planet, as stewards of our communities. And I think that at least in our situation in Apogee, we've been very, very sensitive to the native species that are there, both plant and animal. We've spent a small fortune relocating certain species of turtles in particular. We've been very careful with all the native blue fescue, all the live oaks that were there. And look, chemical, my heart always goes out to superintendents who have, I don't care how tough a GM's job, how tough a GM thinks their job is. No one has a tougher job than the superintendent, and that speaks to their responsibility, the impact they have on the environment, the fact that chemicals are being delisted, and then they have to change agronomic programs. Their spray programs are always being adjusted. But I think as a trend, I mean, I don't know of any club that's not moving that direction of greater sustainability, being more conscious of the quality of the water that they're serving their members, trying to reduce plastic, just being better stewards because we're all under the microscope. Think about water consumption, and the fact that I mean, that will remain a hot topic, I think, forever. I mean, usage, and how do we decrease usage? And it's complicated, particularly in certain parts of the country. So I think from a trend perspective, and I know the USGA is revisiting that from their sustainability efforts. So I think good news is that we as an industry continue to move forward in a very positive way in trying to reduce plastic consumption, water consumption, and by the way, hopefully offering our members in terms of wellness, not just workout facilities, yoga and Pilates, but offering them less processed foods, which I think is critically important. That's a food trend, right? we want less processed foods. We want more natural food. And I'm not talking about the sort of the cool farm to table. I mean, that's as a concept, I get it, and there's a marketing element, but I'm just talking about, the processed cold cuts and all of those things that we know are inherently not good for us. And we have the ability to make those changes, which is hopefully to the betterment of the membership and their health.
Fewer Twinkies and more creme brulee, I suppose, right? So
Yeah, definitely less Twinkies.
I love them all. And I don't know where we stand on paper straws, but I know that's been a hot topic. I will gladly sacrifice my comfort to save one turtle if paper straws will do it. But you'd mentioned capital expenditures, and you oversaw a lot during your 31 years at Wingfoot. Uh, how did your approach to financing and prioritizing these expenditures change over time?
I've been asked that question a lot because what we did, Rob, was a very ambitious project. We renovated both golf courses under the auspices of Gil Hanse and Jim Wagner, and they did a fabulous job. We installed sub-air systems. We did drainage. We renovated the clubhouse. We built an employee house. We renovated the pool facility. I'm trying to think what else we did. Both locker rooms. I mean, it was a very ambitious project. So and this goes back to sort of communication and data and socializing. We didn't put a shovel in the ground until we had a complete plan. And when I say a complete plan, I mean we had a genuine 5-year plan, not sort of let's pencil some things out for 5 years. Here's the plan we're going to do. And we always said we were going to do a little bit of sort of important and then a little bit of non-sexy, right? So you do the sexy and the non-sexy. So you would do 9 holes and then you would replace the boiler. You would do a project that impacted the women more, and then you would do another project on the golf course. So we were always trying to balance, but that was a result of a lot of work in terms of communication, working with some really great professionals, outlining the whole thing. And to your question about financing, we spent a great, fortunately, look, we were in a very good position, with having hosted a couple of US Opens and having a robust business. Not every club is that fortunate. And we were able to do it with a combination of club funds and assessments. And it was funny, at the time, it was one of those things that, the members will never accept an assessment. Well, members they do accept assessments as long as they are communicated, as long as the why is being communicated, and there's a sensitivity, and this goes back to sort of the older generation, younger generation, and there always has to be sensitivity for the older generation. Look, there's guys and gals who are in their 85th year, and they look at it and they say, look, it's not fair to have assessment be $15,000 or $20,000, knowing that, in terms of my use is limited. And that's something we were very conscious of. And again, so to sort of package this into a couple of thoughts, a master plan is much more than just, there's the master plan, there's the strategic element, there's the finance element of it, and it has to be one thing. It can't just be, let's put a shovel in the ground and figure out the next year. If you truly want to do a master plan, it has to be very, very, the time schedule and the communication during the process, Rob, is critical. Here's where we stand, both from a construction perspective and from a finance perspective. And so, look, I don't know of any clubs, by the way, which haven't done pretty significant renovations. And again, this goes back to as my statement earlier about the mid-tier clubs that are no longer mid-tier clubs. I think they've recognized that to remain competitive in this world, that there has to be capital commitments to the facility. And again, I visited clubs from Boston to Houston to St. Louis to Chicago. I've yet to see a club that hasn't reinvested, and most of them have done it in a very thoughtful way, and typically a combination of club funds. Financing is tough now because rates are so high, but think about it. There were clubs that were able to take advantage of 3 and 4%, interest rates not that long ago. So, but it's in our case, we were very fortunate. We hit every mark We hit every budget. The last project was a 38,000 square foot maintenance facility, which was complicated but completed. And it requires, the one thing I would advise people is make sure you have professionals involved. You can't do this. This cannot be a member committee, because you know what happens with that. I mean, it's one member wants one thing one year and another. So you have to have long-term buy-in, even if your governance structure, dictates that board members rotate out, there has to be a long-term commitment by the board and by the membership.
So one thing that I love the most about the club industry is idea sharing and mentorship. You've mentored a lot of professionals over the years. What advice would you give to a young GM or an aspiring GM about what keys to focus on and to be successful in a future-ready club?
Well, I think about that a lot because I get a lot of phone calls from younger managers who want to have lunch and who want to chit chat a little bit. I think a couple of things that I always share. One of them is that never forget it's a job. As much as clubs say, we're family, and I guess it's family with a small f, your real family is at home. So never forget that. And it's a job, treat it like a job, right? Never get so comfortable that you're sitting in the dining room eating and drinking, or you're teeing it up 2 and 3 times a week. I think that's a recipe for failure. I think that you have to recognize that as glamorous as these jobs are, because you get to put on a suit and tie and walk around a fancy dining room, that it requires discipline, it requires focus. I say this to every young club manager, it's in the details. I can show up at your club and within 30 seconds, I know whether or not the club is well managed or not. I can tell from the condition of the front door, the floor mat, whether or not there's somebody at the receptionist desk. So the details are critically important. And I would say in retrospect, after having spent probably too many hours working to maintain, and I know it's, work-life balance is one of those overused terms now, but again, don't forget your real family is at home. And to from the beginning, when you accept a new position, outline that, discuss it. Don't be afraid to discuss it. Say to the board, I need certain days off. And this is just, I'm doing this for everyone's good, mine, my family's, and the clubs. So I think and I think to that point, Rob, I think that the other thing I share with young club managers is establish a comfort level with communication. Have a regular meeting with whoever your direct report is, whether it's a house chairman, whether it's a club president, and don't be afraid to communicate and ask them to communicate. Because I think one of the failures, and I know, look, I have colleagues who 3 or 4 years into a job, they've been let go and there's no discussion about it, no conversation. The board and the little cabal decided that they weren't doing a good job, and they were never given a heads up. They were never given any feedback. Ask for a regular review, ask for a 6-month review, ask for an end of year review, and not sort of one that's done in passing over a cocktail, a real one that involves, objectives, KPIs. How am I doing? Because if I'm getting real feedback from a board member or from the board, that's super helpful. It can be hurtful at times, but I think it's really super helpful to let me progress as a young professional.
Excellent advice all around. I'll get you out on this one. I always ask our guests to take out their crystal ball.
Mhm.
I want you to look in the crystal ball 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. What are some of the greatest opportunities or threats that you see to the club industry?
Well, I think one of the great opportunities for the club industry is the influx of women, particularly Latinas, and I say that because I had the good fortune of working with two very talented young Latinas who've gone on to bigger jobs, and have been very successful. I think the club industry is finally ready to have women in the ranks. Yeah, I mean, I saw Kristen LeCount not that long ago, the general manager, chief operating officer at the Country Club, Brooklyn, Mass. She's a sensational GM, and I think she's just the beginning of this opportunity to have clubs accept into the ranks and boards, and clubs recognize that there's a lot of great talent out there. Now, to that point, I think there are the obvious bottom line challenges. who knows what happens 5 years from now in terms of the economy. But I think the labor situation is not going to get any better. I think we're going to continue struggling with that, and I think we need to open up our minds a little bit in terms of where we get staffing from, how we retain staff, how we become an employer of preference. So I think that on the opportunity side, I think there's an opportunity to welcome more women into the ranks of club management, which I see happening all the time. And I think there's a certain, this is without sounding too old fashioned or sexist, but I think women bring a different perspective, right? Where they have a sort of a nurturing quality, maybe the aesthetic, their sense of how a club should be maintained from a housekeeping perspective, from a cleanliness organizational perspective. So I think that's a great opportunity. I think the challenge will remain. We're going to be facing, clearly there's going to be bottom line pressure, which there always is just from the alcohol consumption, which ties in, by the way, with the wellness, right? I mean, that next generation is drinking less. And I don't think it's necessarily a cannabis related thing, because some people say that's a result of it. I think part of it is just plain old wellness. People are just drinking less because they want to be healthier. So I think that there are those actually P&L, pressures. But then the pressure of labor, I think just continues and continues and continues. And I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, that's going to be, I mean, obviously an ongoing story. And on Kristen LeCount, she was a rising star, I think 5 or 6 years ago. We recognized her, and obviously the star has risen. I mean, she's reaching the pinnacle at a very young age, and I love the diversity of ideas from women, minorities. You get a bunch of old white guys in the room, and things are going to look like a bunch of old white guys. You get some minorities, some women. Some marginalized groups, and that really does kind of broaden things and bring it into today.
Well, when I think about it, so the club manager was Lily Braswell, who's originally from Peru, who's now a general manager as part of one of the Trump properties in Westchester. Ileana Valerio, she's the assistant to Lily from the Dominican Republic. She's now the assistant GM at Country Club of Darien. Our executive chef, first female executive chef of any top 10 club. You've seen Chrissy featured in the magazine, Chrissy Bennett, who now has left Wingfoot, Jamaican American female. She's now the executive chef at Waikiki. So I was surrounded by some really smart, powerful women, and I saw the benefits. I saw the positive aspects of their being involved. And it made me, being surrounded by those smart, hard-working women, a better manager.
Hey, from your mouth to God's ears, let's keep it rolling. Colin Burns, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate
Uh,
it.
Rob, always a pleasure. Thanks. Good seeing you.